Hi guys, and welcome to Questions and Answers. So earlier this week I put out a video asking you guys for lots of questions to see if I should do something like this, and we had a lot of comments. I think there's like 140 odd comments on that video at the moment, so there's a lot of questions, which is really cool. So hopefully I should be able to make something good out of this series. What I'm going to do is split these questions and answers videos into two different types. There's going to be one about mechanics and different various mechanical things we know about the game, and the other one's going to be to do with lore, which is really the one I'll be probably a bit better with, if I'm perfectly honest. So we'll be splitting those questions into those two categories, and they'll be on the different videos depending. The footage in the background for this video is going to be more Guild Wars 2 Guru Curse stuff. I'm looking to try and get permission from some other people so we can mix up the footage a little bit more, but that's them at the moment playing there in the background. Thank you very much to them for letting me use the footage, and let's crack on. So what I'm going to try and do here is not necessarily pick the best questions that are there at the moment, but I'm just going to work from the earliest ones that were asked to the later ones that were asked, and we'll just slowly work our way through them as time goes on. So the first question comes in from Mickey Gaming 1, who asks, can you confirm that some professions get aggro easier than others, like warriors or guardians? No, that's not true at all. Certain professions don't have a greater ability for aggroing certain enemies. There's no such thing as a taunt in Guild Wars 2, which is really important, because a massive thing Guild Wars 2 is trying to do, obviously, is break the Trinity, okay? And there have been a lot of changes towards the end, but one of the big ones is the fact that you can't taunt enemies anymore. People always point to the fact that the game lacks a dedicated healer as the reason why the Trinity doesn't exist, but it's actually more involved than that, because you can't have a tank either, and tanks are a really important part of the Trinity, and you can't have that because no one can tank. You can't trivialize the AI of all the enemies and have them just pound on the tank the entire time. There's no way to do that. Enemies aggro based on different factors this time around, which is interesting because it seems like they've actually dumbed down the AI for how they aggro, which is kind of a weird thing. So in Guild Wars 2 they always talk, the developers, I think the only other quotes we've heard is that primarily enemies will aggro based on proximity. So the closest person to one of the enemies, that'll be the one that they decide to pick. But they've always said primarily, so there could be other factors coming into it. So for example, if you've got an ally who's super low on health, the AI might be smart enough to swap and try and hit them. In fact, in Guild Wars 1, a big part of the game really was you could tank in the game, but it was significantly harder and less viable in that game for regular play at the very least, because there was no way to taunt in that game either. But in Guild Wars 1 there were a lot more interesting things going on with the AI as well. Like for example, they would always judge how much armor each individual player had, and they try and go for the players with less armor, but proximity always came into it with Guild Wars 1 as well. So it's interesting. I do have to wonder how it's going to work out in Guild Wars 2. I guess a lot of people are worried actually that this might mean it's still going to be possible, even easier to tank in Guild Wars 2 than it even was in Guild Wars 1. They're worried that that's going to continue just because the main factor is how close you are to an enemy, because just by knowing that, because players know that, they could in effect, I guess, be able to manipulate the AI of the enemies. However, because defensive skills have always got such huge cooldowns, and the idea is you don't want one player tanking the hits of loads and loads of enemies at once, because dodging and moving around is such a big part of the game, I actually don't think it's going to be that bad, because say you're trying to tank, then all the enemies are going to start hitting you. To survive, you have to start dodging out of the way of things, right? You dodge, suddenly there's a huge gap between you and the enemies. You might have even dodged closer to your teammates, in which case now the enemies are going to swap who they're attacking. So even though proximity is the main thing in Guild Wars 2, it should mean that still we're going to be able to get these dynamic fights, just because most skills can be used on the move, and that's true of most enemies as well. They should be able to use abilities as they're moving towards you. In particular, you can see that happening with a lot of the underwater combat, like the Crate look really deadly, really dangerous. They can use all these kind of crazy abilities, and especially underwater as well, when you consider all the different abilities that can mean an enemy pulls you directly out of the back line right into the front and just move everyone around, sink you down, raise you up. Because there's so much movement going on, we should find in the end that the enemy's AI isn't going to be trivialized like it is in other games where people just taunt, and still the fact that you can't have a tank will hold true, even though it does sound like at the moment it is quite a basic system that the enemies are on, choosing who they're going to attack. So it should be interesting to see, but it's not something I'm personally thinking is going to be a showstopper for the removal of the Holy Trinity, not by a long way. The next question comes in from Sleazy Arts, what an amazing name that is, who says, this question isn't really about the game or lore, but more about your opinion. What do you think of the collector's edition of Guild Wars 2? Do you think it's a waste of money? I'll probably get it just because I'm in love with the game. So much if it was something like COD, I would just get the regular game instead. So for me, I think the collector's edition, the physical collector's edition of the game, really just depends on how much A, you like physical stuff. B, obviously how much money you have in real life is going to change how you value it. And C, how much of a fan really you are of the game. For example, me, I'm a massive fan of Guild Wars 2. I don't particularly like physical stuff. Like, for example, a big part of the collector's edition is obviously that you've got this massive statue that you can get out of the box. But to me, I don't really care about statues. Like, Skyrim came with a massive statue. Loads of collector's editions are now doing big statues. It seems to be this thing that everyone's doing recently. Have you guys noticed that? But I don't actually care for the statues. I really don't. It will just sit around on my desk or somewhere where I can barely see it, and I just won't really ever like to use it. I'm actually a little bit disappointed that it is just a statue that's in there, really. There are other things, of course, but, you know, the statues are the big bit. We had a huge thread on Guild Wars 2 Guru for the longest time, where people were talking about the collector's edition and what they'd like to see in it, and there were so many amazing ideas for, like, the physical items that were cut that people wanted to see in the collector's edition. Like, they were saying stuff like globs of ectoplasm, stress balls, and stuff like card sets, but Guild Wars 2 themed. So, you know, you could have, like, the King of Spades would be a specific character from the game, and all kinds of really, really cool stuff like that, but none of it really seems to have come through in the end. I mean, I would have been really happy with that. I do like physical knickknacks, and I like interesting little things like that, but statues just really aren't up my alley that much. However, having said that, I am a massive fan of the game, so I probably will get the collector's edition myself. If you're like me and you're in England or you're around Europe and you're not paying for the collector's edition with the dollar, it will cost a lot more, and I'm really kind of pissed off about that. People talk about it being to do with taxes or shipping fees and stuff like that. I'm not convinced. I'm really not. It could be cheaper. It definitely could. I think in particular Europeans are getting ripped off quite significantly, and I know there are other places as well in the world that get ripped off. Like usually Australia and New Zealand, they have to spend so much money on these things. But you know, I guess that's not really something down to ArenaNet. I think that's just kind of what games are doing these days, and we kind of have to suck it up. So, like I say, it really comes down to where you are in the world, because you're going to be spending more or less depending on that, and how much money you've got to spare and how much of a fan you are of the game. I mean, as for the physical things themselves, why go collector's edition instead of digital deluxe? I'm not sure. I think a lot of people probably will go with digital deluxe because there's the other issue of pre-purchasing the game. I mean, I think a lot of us want to pre-purchase it, really, because of the 3-day head start and guaranteed access to the beta. That's something really big. But if you want to go collector's edition and pre-purchase it, you're going to need to buy from specific stores, which I don't believe that they've actually announced just yet. So we're all kind of sitting on our hands and hoping that it will be somewhere we can actually get access to it early. So that's going to come into it for me. I actually quite like a lot of the digital items they're offering with the digital deluxe. That's pretty cool. Obviously, you get those with full-fledged collector's edition as well, which is nice. But so it just comes down to how much you value the physical stuff, really. Do you think that extra chunk of value really comes into it? I think for me personally it does, but I'm not sure whether, honestly, I think it's worth it just because I feel a little bit obligated to buy it, because I know I'm such a big fan of it, even though I don't really care for the statue. But you do get other little things in there as well, which is quite cool. I'm particularly interested in the making of DVD and the art book. I mean, we all know ArenaNet's renowned for their amazing artists, so that should just be great. I mean, I do already own the actual art book that they've already released while Guild Wars 2's been in development. Actually, I'm not sure. Is it the same art book? I don't think it is. I know the one you get in collector's edition is hardback. I'm not sure if it's the exact same art book. If it's the same art book you can already buy separately, then yeah, that decreases the value as well. I'll have to look into that. But in general, I think that they've done quite well with collector's edition. Collector's editions for Guild Wars 1 were always a big deal. People loved collector's editions for Guild Wars 1. They were always something I felt like ArenaNet did quite well with. I always felt awesome opening up my collector's editions. In fact, I bought my collector's editions long after I already owned the other games. I got them mostly for the mini pets later on, but it was really, really cool to be able to open them and see the stuff you got in there, like the mouse mats and stuff. So yeah, I mean, even if the collector's edition, you're not into statues or anything like me, I do still think it's cool that ArenaNet went ahead with one at the very least, and it's something that people will still be able to enjoy with the sequel. But the last one comes in from Falconer Blitz, who says, do all the Guardian Spirit weapons hit or attack? Specifically, does the bow shoot or only remove condition? Yeah, this is quite an interesting one. I don't actually think, I personally definitely haven't seen any footage of this Spirit Bow being used in beta footage that we've already seen. I believe we first heard about this through Reddit. This was kind of where this one was announced with one of the Ask Me Anythings with John Peters. So I'm not sure how it works, but the description of it is that you would summon an arcane bow to remove conditions from you on your ally, allies, which means that I'm pretty sure the bow will be attacking. I'm pretty sure they all have a component where they'll be auto-attacking. Simply because if it didn't do that, it would be a bit weird to imagine a bow floating around that's maybe every now and then sending out a pulse that removes conditions from people in the area, yet does nothing else. Because at the end of the day, it is a bow. You would expect it to be shooting something. So I do think they probably all do have an auto-attacking aspect to them. However, all these additional effects on them, like the other weird one is the Shield of the Avenger, which the description is summons an arcane shield to defend you. You could take that to mean anything, really. You might imagine instead of the shield actually going up to things and sort of shield bashing them constantly as an auto attack, you could imagine that then kind of floating in front of you and then blocking every other hit that comes in at you while it lasts, or something like that. But I do think that they will all have some kind of active component, and that these other secondary effects, which are obviously there to make all of the different spirit weapons feel distinct from one another, will probably just be more passive things that happen every now and then. So in the case of the bow, it will probably just auto attack, and every now and then a condition will be removed from someone. But then again, these are all subject to change, right? I mean, we've seen how much the skills have changed. When we first saw the game at the original Gamescom demo, when that first came out, it was ridiculous, the amount of change. Everything was so different at that point. When the next year came round and we saw the demo again, it almost felt pointless for any of us to have recorded any of the skills down, because they just seemed to have changed so much. There were so many little changes that happened all over the place. So at the moment, it might say, oh hey, the Bow of Truth removes conditions from you and your allies. How it specifically does that could be completely different each time. Maybe it's just as soon as you summon it, it will remove conditions from everyone in the area. Maybe it's more of a constant thing. I actually tend to get the feeling that it's not very useful to be speculating on things like this, not while the game's still in development, because we hear a lot about people already crafting builds and deciding exactly how they're going to play their character based on all the different combinations they can do with various things. But I think it is very easy to forget that the game's still in development, and I reckon by open beta or by launch, it will just feel completely pointless to all of us to have speculated on any of it, because it will have just been changed too much. So at the moment, I mean, I'm not sure. There might be some real footage out there of the Bow of Truth, but the actual specifics of it, I would recommend we don't really worry ourselves with too much. And in fact, as this series goes along, I don't think I'll be answering many questions about specific minute details on individual skills, because, you know, if you're asking the question because you think it's overpowered, then it doesn't really matter, because it could have changed. If you're asking the question because you think it's underpowered, then yeah, ArenaNet will probably see it themselves. The entire skill system, this idea of skills being tied to weapons and forcing people to have healing skills and stuff, it's all so that the game is easier to balance. ArenaNet learned a lesson in Guild Wars 1 about keeping the game in an environment where they have a sacred resource like recharge to balance things around. They learn how important it is to do these things, so that come Guild Wars 2 they can balance these things. And for those reasons, I am fairly confident, honestly, that by the game's launch, or at least a couple of months after launch, where the biggest, most glaring problems have been ironed out, the game will be pretty balanced. I'm pretty sure it will be quite balanced. So these little things, especially so early, I mean, we're hearing about beta, don't get me wrong, we can pre-purchase the game, there's all kinds of stuff going on, but they also kind of said that there would be one beta a month, which means, hey, it could still be a good at least 2, and, you know, possibly more, coming up on 4 or 5 months before the game's actually launched. So we are still in early days, and these little things I just don't think are as important as maybe some of us are thinking that they are going to be. Anyway, there you go, guys. I'm going to go film the lore episode now. There's actually so many questions. If I can't get many in each episode, I might end up doing like both one mechanic and one lore one every day. That would be quite cool, wouldn't it? I don't know. Anyway, thanks very much for watching, guys. This is the first one of these. I hope you enjoyed it, and I guess I will see you next time. See you later, everyone.